Well, hey everybody, it is Wes McDonald here, and it is Wednesday, March 22nd, and that officially means we're in spring. Hence my spring word. Do you like it, Ken?
Yep, looks good. I was just playing gray today.
Well, you didn't get the memo clearly, but at any rate,
I obviously didn't. Of course, in Florida, it's felt like spring for the most part for a while. Though
That's
Monday
true.
morning was cold. I was out and around, and it was cold. In fact,
But
I was
what,
cold
70
enough I
degrees
wanted to-
cold?
Huh?
70 degrees cold?
No, it was like 49, and I was like, I wished I'd put a jacket on because I was out for a while outside. And I was like, oh, this is cool.
As the Canadian on the show, what I wouldn't do for 49 degrees right now. But
Yeah, I understand.
at any rate, good to see you. Nice to see you on terra firma. We talked about it. You won't be traveling for a little while, at least. So nice to see you back in Florida.
Yep, it's nice to be where I have a good internet connection and have all my tools available. I like that. I love being gone, but I love having all my tools and a great internet connection.
I know, right? And the thing is with tools that when you're traveling, if you do want to bring them, there is a certain level of complexity to that, right? So, and
Yes.
speaking level of complexity, obviously people, nothing gets more complicated than people. And I would say, especially in the professional world, when we're trying to, keep people or attract people or, do other things to help our organization so we can better serve our customers, right? So maybe you can let us know what we're going to be talking about today related to that.
Well, we have a really interesting show, and this is one of the things. It was interesting. It came up because I was at the BTA event last week. It came up there. For those that missed it, you missed. It's the first time I've ever seen a single standing ovation, much less two standing ovations for speakers at the BTA. I mean, it was a dynamite show. But we're going to be talking about recruiting the best and the bright. Before we get to that, though, we need people to tell us where you're joining us from. Because you know where I am. I'm in Florida. West is in Canada. We'll have to find out from our guest in just a second where she's from. And the other thing is if you have questions and comments, we want you to put them in. This is your chance to talk directly with our speaker and get their insight on whatever your question is. Now, if it's a really complicated, expensive question, I'm sure she'll send you a bill afterwards, but maybe not.
Yeah.
Anyway,
for everyone that's watching when it's not live, same thing. Leave your comments and questions. We get to them just as though we were watching live. So we'll get to that. So without further ado, Carolyn Ross, how are you, Carolyn?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you, Wes?
Oh, really well. And super excited to have you on today. And maybe what you can do for those of our audience members that don't know you, maybe give a brief introduction on yourself.
As you said, my name's Carolyn Ross. I'm the founder and president of Ross Insight Solutions, which is an HR consulting practice. I'm based in Massachusetts, kind of halfway between Boston and Providence, Rhode Island. I have 25 years of HR experience, mostly as an in-house HR leader. And prior to that, I actually practiced law and owned one of the first mediation businesses in the Northeast. So it's not my first, business venture. And Ross Insight Solutions partners with small and medium-sized businesses to meet, all of their different HR needs, whether it's, training, hiring, compliance, policies, etc., helping with retention, engagement, creating an intentional culture, all of those pieces. So yeah, there you go. There's the full list.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. And really interesting. So background as a lawyer, it's amazing the number of interviews we do where somebody in area of excellence for something else started someplace else. And Ken, I know that we just had one recently for someone that was actually a professor, was known as the first lady of sales, right? And then moving into the sales arena. And so what sort of inspired the move from law into HR?
Things, but one of them was that I like to learn and grow and do new things all the time. And after about 8 years of law practice, it got to be pretty routine. You're kind of doing the same things over and over again. And I also realized that I like to help solve people problems, not create them. And what I really realized is I don't like contentious, situations. I want to go in and say, okay, here's the problem. what are the ways we can solve it and help make things better? And so I started talking to people about different career options and did some, tests on what I was good at and what my interests led to. And it all pointed to HR. And as I said, I changed careers 25 years ago and absolutely love it. I have never regretted that decision.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of fun, and it's interesting what you say about solving customer problems, and that's how I got into kind of the sales arena myself, right? And the business arena was helping to solve problems is a lifelong, I would almost call it a service, right? Because what we're trying to do for customers to help them really to better their lives, to empower them to accomplish the things that they want to, right? And I went to school to be a high school teacher or a professor. I wasn't sure which direction I was going to go, and clearly didn't end up there. But I'll tell you that one thing that's never stopped is the teaching and the learning, right? And I think that's one thing I love about the business world, right?
Yeah.
I'm wondering, maybe one of those things we can talk about. This is a lesson you can definitely help people with. Is this idea of finding the best and the brightest. So we live in a world that's a little different than it was, say, 5 years ago. There's all this talk now, and the reality of work from anywhere and offices having to change the way that they kind of inspire people to work for them. So what do we do in this new age for finding the best and the brightest?
Yeah, I think it's a very important question. And, who you hire affects every aspect of your business. It affects your clients or customers, and therefore it affects your bottom line, right? And I think a lot of small and medium-sized companies, they don't really put a lot of thought into their hiring processes and where to find those best people. They post a job, they hope for the best. It's kind of like, West, I know you like to fish. I saw that in some of your podcasts. It's kind of like fishing without bait, or maybe even without a hook, right? So I think the first thing is decide what you are and what you want to be. What's your culture? What types of people do you want to attract, and how do you go after those people? Where do you find them? Where do they eat, sleep, and play, so to speak? Where, depending on what the job is and what your industry is, best where to find those folks. And just posting on Indeed or wherever isn't always the best solution.
I love the fishing analogy, and I'm going to take it one step further before you shut me off, Ken. And then I promise I'll put myself into the green room if I have to. But Carolyn gave me an opening, and I got to use it. So, yes, you know what? You're right. One of the things I've learned, I do love fishing. And depending on what you're trying to catch and where you're fishing, you have to change a lot of things up. So if I'm fishing for bass, there are different plastics that I use than if I'm fishing for, say, walleye or perch, even though it's on the same lake. So you think the same lake, just throw the same bait in and you'll catch whatever you catch, but that's not true. And it sounds to me like it's the same with people, right? That, you have to be much more, I guess, intentional about the things that you're doing to get them. Is that fair?
Exactly it. Yeah, intentionally planning for this, not just accidentally posting.
Yeah, and I was going to say, it was interesting because I love your use of the term culture, because we had a guest on last week that we talked about culture, and he quoted something that I loved, because they were talking about Chick-fil-A and the owner of Chick-fil-A, and people asked him how he taught people to say please and thank you. And he said, I didn't teach them, I hired them, because that was the culture. And culture came up twice during presentations at the BTA event as well. And so I love that, the thought process of let's hire the people that fit our culture. And one of the things, where go back to the fishing analogy for just a minute, is that you can't catch fish if you don't have the line in the water. And so I teach my service managers that they should always be recruiting. Even if they're not hiring, they need to always be recruiting, looking for their next right person.
Right. Yeah, and part of that also is always shaping your culture and your employer brand. So when people hear the name of your business, what do they think of? Or if they ask people, if they don't know your business because you're smaller, not as well known as some of the giants, when they ask people or they look online, what do they see about your business in terms of the value of people? A lot of businesses' websites don't speak to their culture or their business. It only speaks to their services and products. But there's a great quote to what you're saying, there's a great quote, hire for attitude, train for skill. I think it was Herb Kelleher who said that. But you can't hire for attitude if you don't know what your culture is and what attitude you're looking for.
Isn't it true? And culture is so absolutely, important, right? And give you an example. So Tiger Paw Software, company that I work for, my title with the company, it could be a typical title, but it's not, because as you can see by the shirt and sort of my personality, I'm the CNO, which is the chief noisemaker, the CNM. So, that culture allows me, and they know that, and I know that, to be able to work together. Some cultures aren't that way. And having that intentionality with your culture makes it, I would agree, probably much easier to get the right kinds of candidates in the first place, right?
Right. And then when you're interviewing them, it's about where you're finding them, but it's also about, what are you asking them? What are you telling them? How are you selling your organization and what your expectations are in that job? How are you making that selection about who you're going to hire, and not just hiring anyone because you need somebody in that role yesterday, but being very careful about that.
Yeah, I've heard the expression hire slow and fire fast, right? And I'm not necessarily saying we have to fire fast, and it looks like Greg does have a question here. Maybe you can answer. Prospective employees should always dive deep into a prospective employer's real culture beyond words on the wall, correct? And I think that's a fair question. The culture that the organization has versus what maybe they say it is, right?
Yes, I agree. And it's harder today if you're not going there in person or if everybody's virtual. I absolutely agree with that, Greg. And I think finding opportunities to talk to people you're going to work with, people who've been there for a while, whether you find them yourself on LinkedIn, so that you're getting a true independent perspective, and probably should do both, asking the folks you're interviewing with, can I talk to the people I'm going to work most directly with? Who else will be on my team? How can I connect with them before I make a decision?
I love that, because if they said, for example, oh yeah, one of our cultural pillars is an openness and no hierarchy, right? It's like, great, can I speak to a couple of your people? No, we don't allow that. Oh, wait a minute.
Right.
Yeah, and I have to tell a story on myself, because I learned Greg's lesson here the very difficult way. I applied for a job and went out and talked to a company in California, and I interviewed with them on a Saturday. And the people that I interviewed were the owners, and this was a manager's position, and they seemed like the nicest people on the planet. When I took the job and got out there, I saw that was not the way they worked normally. They were crazy people. It was like they checked their brain the moment they walked in. And I spent a year and a half, well, actually almost 2 years, staying between them and my employees so that I still had employees. That was my job as the manager, was to run interference. And I was like, I learned you don't ever apply an interview on a weekend. You want to see the place in action, and as was mentioned, try to observe.
Right. Exactly. And not just observe pockets, but the ones that you're going to need to interact with.
Okay, so that kind of leads to the next question. So we want these brightest and best people. What are some of the ways we try to attract them to think about applying? Because that's the first hurdle, really, is to get them to want to come to work for us.
Right. I think it starts, as I said, with your website and your job posting too. What do you say in your job posting that helps people get excited about you as an employer and understand your culture and what your expectations are of people and how they fit in there? You can put that right in the advertisement. Most people just list the job title, who it reports to, and the skills and the qualifications. But the best postings I've seen talk about, and that I've used, they talk about what it's like to be a part of that organization. And ideally, as I said, there should be something on the website that gets to that too, that builds people up about, teamwork, collaboration, problem solving, innovation, whatever it is that great service delivery, customer service, whatever those key things are, figure out what your culture, your values, it comes from your values, what's important to you, and where are you going in the future, particularly if you're a growing company, but even if you're not, what are your goals and expectations for the future of the organization, and how do you want these people to contribute to that future?
And it looks like Greg has another one, and I get this one for sure. Speaking of virtual, isn't the virtual experience part and parcel of the culture that may not have been planned, but evolved more organically? And I can certainly say that that virtual experience for a lot of folks did, sort of happen organically, right? Tiger Paw is another great example. And if you ever talk to James Foxall, the man that runs the show over there, when I first started working for him remotely many, many years ago, he said I would be the only employee that would ever, be able to do that. That he wanted people in the office. It was better. It was this. And through the pandemic, seeing the productivity, in some cases, gains in certain areas, he completely changed. It's like, if we're going to have an office for you, if folks want to come in, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. You figure out what mix works best for you. And I was super impressed with, I guess, that culture that they actually do say people first. And they expressed that, right? When things changed, it wasn't like you have to come back to the office now. So I think Greg's question is a good one, right? For organizations that went through that organically, maybe didn't plan to, like, how do we deal with that, virtual experience? How do you deal with it if you're dealing with an employer that might have to go there?
Yeah, organically almost sounds like it grew over time. I think overnight it suddenly happened, right? And a lot of places didn't have a choice. And now the question is, do we live with that? Do we go back to bringing people in? Do we force them in, or we just offer it as an option? And I think for those companies that really want to find the best and the brightest, the more flexible you are, the better off you'll be. Now, some jobs don't lend themselves to that, but we found out that most do. And employers such as the colleague you mentioned who thought that can't work have learned that it can work and be just as productive, if not more so. So I think there are ways that employers now can structure a flexible workplace, the in-office and the virtual, and have it work for everybody. And do it very intentionally. That's a word you used before. And I think intentional is key to all of this. How do you set things up so that people feel connected, whether they're fully virtual or some of them are in the office and some aren't, or you bring them all in a couple days a week. Every Tuesday and Thursday, everybody's going to be in-house, and we'll connect more directly that way. But if they're all over the country, or I've worked in global companies where they're all over the world.
Sure.
And people worked. This was long before the pandemic, and people worked very effectively together.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that. And Greg Walters says, thank you, by the way. I'm glad you raised that, right? Because this idea of remote work, although it is kind of new for a lot of folks, like you said, a global organization typically has been doing that for a very long time, right? That this is a proven model across some industries.
Yes. Yeah. And even, I was in healthcare when the pandemic started, and really for the first couple of years of the pandemic, and they'd never done anything like that because everybody had to be in there, and they had to figure out the technology and they didn't have the tools, but nowadays we have all these tools to make it pretty easy.
So that kind of brings up the next question. If we find these people and we have the story, we have the culture that fits with them, now we're going to bring them on board. How do we make sure that as they come on board that we do that? Because too many times somebody gives you, and I go back to my experience in lots of different ways, but people give you a manual, and that's kind of the end of the onboarding. You read it and you sign the cover page, and most of us just sign the cover page and give it to them. And so how do we make sure that they get onboarded in a way that makes them, it helps them get their roots in the company, I guess, is a good way to ask the question.
Yep. And that also starts with culture and being intentional. I think it's not just about the paperwork and getting them to sign off on policies, but having a plan. And that plan should span really the first 3 to 6 months, ideally. And it should be, something on paper that involves a lot of interaction with a lot of different people. And getting to know different aspects of your organization, coming to understand your culture. What else? Obviously job training, job skills, and ongoing development. How are you going to make them or help them understand that for the next 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, 10 years, hopefully a long time, that they'll stay with your organization, you'll be able to be there for them too, developing them, helping them learn and grow. It's not just about what they do for your clients and customers, but nowadays, especially what's in it for them. So welcoming them and, making expectations clear, but then helping them grow into those and beyond.
I love that, because one of the things that I teach in for my service managers is to build out 100-day plan. Because I know I go back to my time as a service manager. Until I got my plan built out, what would happen is somebody'd show up and I'm like up to my eyeballs in alligators, and I am like, okay, HR's brought them back, or the receptionist brought them back, and I say, okay, listen, I need to spend some time with you, but for right now, go work with Bill, go ride with him today, and then tomorrow it's Bob and Joe, and there was no structure. And I am such a believer that having a written out policy so that everybody can give it to that person so they know what to expect. I think that's an important piece of that.
Yeah, when I've built onboarding programs for companies, we've talked about who are those key people that they should meet the first day, the first week, the first few months. How are those meetings going to happen? Can you help schedule them? Maybe some of them even before the person walks in the door on the first day. And let those people know, what are they bringing to the table for that new hire? What are you expecting from them as they meet with that person? So again, being very intentional and planning it for them. And obviously things change. People have to be flexible and be able to, but if something gets dropped and rescheduled, make sure it gets back on the calendar for another time.
Yeah, I love that. So our next question, what's popped it up for us, is how do we make them feel part of something special? Because again, if people feel part of something, if they have that connection, it goes back to the concept of being rooted in the company. I think they're more likely to stay. What do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's all about engagement, right? And keeping them engaged as weeks go by, months go by, years go by. I think a lot of it has to do with what are you delivering to your customers, your clients, and how do they fit into that? Are they an important part of what you're doing? Even if they're sitting in a back room fixing servers, or whatever it is that they're doing, it contributes to the whole. So having them feel like they're part of something that really makes a difference is a first step. Obviously, helping people be connected. As we said, even if they're all virtually connected, have fun, have a trivia night where they all sit and have dinner in their own homes or offices, wherever they happen to be, and you play trivia, or you do something where people get to know each other. And, a lot of people hate icebreakers, they hate games. But once you get people into it, if they're gentle and fun ones, then, people enjoy that.
I was thinking about this, and that my dad had an expression which has stuck with me through my adult years, right? And we were having an argument about something once, and he said, "Oh, do you just want to be right?" And I said, "I am right." And he said, "All right, well, let's stop arguing then, because you're right." And I said, "No, that's not fair," because he goes, "No." And I asked him to explain it to me, why he was upset and why he cut that off. And he said, sometimes it's not the what, it's the how, right? And that stuck with me, because I'll use Ken, in your world, let's say, for example, right, a copier technician, someone's going out to service a device. We could frame that job to say that your job is going to go out and fix these devices, right? And your SLAs that you have to be stuck to are this, this, and this. We could also say your job is to go out there and make sure that that customer has one less thing to worry about, so they can go home at night and sleep better, or so you can give them more time, to find their own ambitions, right? Like, that's your job, to go there and make that difference for them, so that they can have a better, more meaningful, time at work or at home. And again, it's the same job, but just framed in such a different way, right? I think that I would have my nose 1 inch closer to the windshield if I knew it was actually doing something that mattered, right?
Right, exactly. And start with why. Like why do we exist as a company? Why are you a part of this company? Why do we need that job? And why do we want you as an individual in that role? And if you can define that and remind them, I think it's so important. A lot of managers don't remember to remind people, and owners too. This is all the way it starts at the top. But if you remind people regularly, ongoing communication, constant communication is really important. And people get busy in the day-to-day in the work itself, and they forget how important that is to keep people engaged and feel like they're part of something special.
One of the things that I work with my service managers on, and I try to help them spread it in their company as part of the culture, is to treat people, and I mean, you got to provide them the education and the knowledge they need to do it, but to train their people to look at whatever their job is as their business, and to be constantly thinking about, this is my business. How do I make my business better? And for the customer facing, for a technician, the customers in his territory, I try to get my service managers to help them understand that those are their customers. Give them the power to take care of those customers and to do things. So maybe it's an occasionally take if you're going into somebody and they like donuts, take them some donuts. Or if something went wrong, give them the ability to perhaps give them some, a ream of paper, a credit on their account, within reasonable limits. I say, now they're going to make mistakes as they do it, but don't criticize them for doing it, and just help them see how they could have done it better.
Yeah. And go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, Ken, I love what you're saying there, because it's one thing I know for myself personally, right? Is that, when you talk, like the only time you want to hear from a boss is not when they're coming at you with constructive criticism, right? That there have to be those other moments when they're giving you the freedom to do different things and commending you or helping you along in those paths as well, right? Because just like any good relationship, as long as there's enough good that's happening and you're enjoying each other enough, then you can have those moments where it gets serious and stuff, and it doesn't ruin the relationship, right? But if all it is constructive criticism, that I can see that being bad. Is that fair?
Yes, absolutely. And it's hard. A lot of managers are promoted from within, or they come to management almost accidentally. They haven't been taught how to do these things well, and so when it comes to training and development, it starts with supervisory folks, and then that's going to have that impact. How do I have those difficult conversations when I have to, and how have I built that rapport and that engagement so people trust me? They trust me that when I'm giving them constructive feedback, it's for their best and for the best of everybody around them, and it's not coming down on them with a hammer or whatever.
Yeah, perception is 9/10 of reality, right? So if the only thing I ever hear is criticism, no matter how constructive, it's just, I'm going to be worried every time I see that person, right? Hey, and just in the interest of time, we only have a couple of minutes left, but once we get those people, they're important, right? How do we start to groom them for greatness?
Yeah, great question. I think it starts on day one, obviously, with the initial training, but ongoing. Nowadays, employees want to know that they can learn and grow for a long time to come. I mean, as I said, I changed careers because I wanted to learn and grow, right? and it's never disappointed me. So I think, again, it has to be intentional. Managers should sit regularly with their staff and say, what else would you like to do? Where do you see yourself in 2 years, 5 years? How can we help you get there? Because even if you can't get there here in this company, you will stay longer if we help you learn and grow all the time. And there's another quote, a CFO says to the CEO, well, what happens if we train our people and then they leave? And the CEO says to the CFO, what happens if we don't train them and they stay?
Right. I love that one. Yeah.
So, there you go. And they will stay longer if they know that they're benefiting from it and learning.
Well, and I think it breeds a sense of loyalty as well, right? That, I worked for a great leader. I mentioned him many times, John McInnes, and they had a philosophy at work where they would pay both for, like a yearly amount, both for professional development and personal development. So they said, look, every time you complete something professionally, we're going to give you a budget to do some personal learning. So what is that? You want to learn how to play the guitar? Is it art classes? Is it history? What is that, right? And I just love that idea because, man, if someone comes along and says, I'm going to pay you 10% more, in your salary, be like, you got to work a lot harder than that, right? Because I love this place. I love the people I work with. I feel like I'm contributing. This is way more than just about money now, right?
That's great. I love that idea.
Yeah.
Pay for both.
Listen, and I just want to put up here so people can get in touch with you. I'm going to put your website back up and everyone can see oops, I did that wrong. What have I done? Let's try that again. That looks a little better. Yeah, so you can go to the website here. I'll go to the main page. You can see the link there as well. And certainly, as we're fond of in this modern age, making sure that they can find you on LinkedIn as well. So I do have your LinkedIn page here, as well as the link down below. So for anyone that's watching, it is kind of strange in these streams that you can't actually click the link, but you can at least pause it and be able to head over there. And
That's
looks
great.
like Greg Walters says, good job. So thank you very much.
And thank you, Greg.
Yeah, and can't thank you enough, Carolyn, for joining us today and sharing your expertise and helping our viewers and listeners to think a little harder, to look a little deeper when it comes to how they're going after their people. And I think just as importantly, how they keep them.
Great. Thank you both. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was so nice talking with you today, Carolyn. We really appreciate your time and your willingness to show up and be here.
And who else we appreciate? All of our viewers. So thank you very much for tuning in for another Wednesday edition of Level Up Live. And Ken, as I always like to say,
before you say it.
yeah, that's right. As I like to say, Ken, let's talk about next week's show. This is a new segment for us. I was caught off guard. So yes, for those that want to join in on the 29th, Ray Sheehan. That's great. How to grow in a struggling economy. And that's something I know that's keeping a lot of folks up, should be keeping a lot of folks up, thinking about in these recent times, right? All right. And now what do I say, Ken?
You say, let me make that go away. You say, I forgot. What is it you say?
Until next time, keep learning. And you say,
and I say, keep leveling up.
All right, everybody. Have a great day.